Jasmine Carter watches in disbelief as federal agents board the aircraft. The flight attendant who'd humiliated her minutes ago turns ghost white. "Ma'am, we need everyone to deplane immediately," an agent announces. Jasmine clutches her foster daughter's hand, thinking, one phone call changed everything. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you've ever witnessed discrimination or stood up against injustice, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more powerful stories of resilience. Now let's rewind to see how a routine flight turned into a pivotal moment that would change airline policies forever. The morning had started with such promise. Jasmine Carter, a 34-year-old marketing executive from Atlanta, checked her watch as she gently zipped up 8-year-old Zoe's purple unicorn backpack. This would be their first flight together, since Zoe had come into her care 3 months ago, and Jasmine couldn't deny the flutter of nerves in her stomach. "All set, sweetheart?" Jasmine asked, tucking a strand of Zoe's blonde hair behind her ear. The little girl nodded, clutching her stuffed elephant tighter. The contrast between them was visible. Jasmine with her deep brown skin and natural curls, Zoe with her fair complexion and straight blonde hair reflecting her biracial white and Asian heritage. It was a difference Jasmine had grown accustomed to, but one that still drew curious glances from strangers. "Remember what we talked about? We're going to Chicago to meet Grandma Evelyn, and she can't wait to meet you," Jasmine said, keeping her voice steady and warm. The trip had been carefully planned for months, a chance for Zoe to meet the woman who had been Jasmine's rock during her own difficult childhood years. Fostering hadn't been a spontaneous decision for Jasmine. Growing up in the system herself, bouncing between 6 different homes before turning 18, she understood the difference a stable, loving caregiver could make. When her career at Pinnacle Marketing had finally stabilized and her 3-bedroom townhouse was fully paid for, Jasmine knew it was time to give back. The certification process had been rigorous: home inspections, background checks, 36 hours of training classes. Jasmine had approached it with the same determination she applied to landing major clients. When the call came about Zoe, a child who had experienced severe neglect and witnessed domestic violence, Jasmine didn't hesitate. The caseworker had warned her that transracial placements came with unique challenges, but Jasmine felt prepared. What she hadn't prepared for was the paperwork required for travel. The dining room table had disappeared under a mountain of documents: her foster parent certification, temporary custody order, letter from the agency authorizing out-of-state travel, Zoe's birth certificate, medical authorization forms, and insurance cards. Jasmine had made 3 copies of everything, neatly organized in color-coded folders. "Is my elephant allowed on the plane?" Zoe asked, her voice small as they loaded suitcases into the trunk of Jasmine's silver Honda Accord. "Absolutely. Ellie has her own special ticket," Jasmine replied with a wink, relieved to see Zoe's tight shoulders relax slightly. These small victories, a smile, a moment of trust, were precious milestones in their evolving relationship. The drive to Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport took longer than expected. December holiday travel meant traffic choked every approach road. Jasmine maintained a calm exterior, though internally she calculated and recalculated their timing. Arriving flustered would only increase Zoe's anxiety. "Look, they've got giant Christmas trees inside," Jasmine pointed out as they finally entered the bustling terminal. The soaring atrium sparkled with thousands of white lights, momentarily distracting Zoe from her worries. Their moment of wonder didn't last long. As they walked toward the check-in counters, rolling their matching luggage behind them, Jasmine became acutely aware of the stares. A middle-aged white woman nudged her husband, eyes darting between Jasmine and Zoe. An elderly man frowned, his gaze lingering too long. A security guard tracked their movement with unusual interest. Jasmine had experienced this before, the assumption that she couldn't possibly be this child's parent or guardian. The subtle and not-so-subtle ways society questioned the legitimacy of their family unit. She'd developed techniques to handle it, standing taller, maintaining direct eye contact, speaking with unwavering confidence. Today, she added a protective hand on Zoe's shoulder as they approached the Superior Airways check-in counter. "We're going to be fine," Jasmine whispered, as much to herself as to Zoe. "This is going to be a wonderful trip." She couldn't have Known then how drastically wrong she was, or how this routine journey would spiral into a public confrontation that would ultimately ground an entire aircraft and spark a national conversation about race, family, and dignity in America's skies. "Next customer, please," called a voice from Counter 14. Jasmine guided Zoe forward, presenting their ID documents and confirmation number with a practiced smile. "Good morning. We're checking in for flight SA-238 to Chicago," Jasmine said, maintaining steady eye contact with the agent whose nameplate read Bradley Thompson. Bradley, a thin white man with close-cropped hair and a Superior Airways pin gleaming on his Navy uniform, glanced between Jasmine and Zoe before slowly taking the documents. His fingers seemed to move with deliberate sluggishness over his keyboard. "And your relationship to the minor?" he asked. His tone clipped as his eyes remained fixed on the computer screen. "I'm her foster mother," Jasmine replied evenly, already reaching for the folder containing their documentation. "I have all our paperwork right here." Bradley's eyebrows lifted slightly. "We'll need to see proof of guardianship, authorization for travel, and the minor's birth certificate." Jasmine nodded, having anticipated this request. She extracted the neatly organized documents and placed them on the counter. "Here's my foster parent certification, the temporary custody order, travel authorization from the agency, Zoe's birth certificate, and medical forms." Bradley examined each paper with exaggerated thoroughness, occasionally glancing up to study their faces. Jasmine felt Zoe shifting uncomfortably beside her, small fingers tightening around her stuffed elephant. "We also need a signed letter from both biological parents," Bradley stated, sliding the papers back toward Jasmine. Jasmine took a slow, measured breath. "Actually, that's not correct. For foster children, the authorization comes from the Child Welfare Agency, which I've provided. Parental rights are currently under review by the court." Bradley's mouth tightened. "It's company policy." "No, it's not," Jasmine replied, her marketing executive voice emerging, professional but firm. "I confirmed Superior Airways policy for foster families last week with your customer service department. The documentation I've provided exceeds requirements." Bradley stared at her for a long moment before picking up his phone. "Let me speak with my supervisor." As they waited, Jasmine felt a tug on her sleeve. She leaned down to Zoe's level. "Is there a problem?" Zoe whispered, her eyes wide with worry. "Do we have to go back home?" "Not at all, sweetheart," Jasmine assured her, though she could feel her own heart racing. "Sometimes adults just need to talk things through. We're still going to see Grandma Evelyn." 5 minutes stretched into 10. Other passengers moved efficiently through neighboring lines while Jasmine and Zoe remained frozen in place. Zoe began to fidget, her anxiety manifesting in small, repeated movements, twisting the elephant's trunk, tapping her foot against the floor tiles. Finally, a woman in a sharper version of the Superior Airways uniform approached. Her silver-streaked black hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her nameplate identified her as Diana Mercer, supervisor. "Good morning, Ms. Carter," Diana said after briefly reviewing their documentation. "I apologize for the delay. Your paperwork is in perfect order." She shot Bradley a pointed look before turning back to Jasmine with a practiced smile. "We'll have your boarding passes right away." As Diana processed their check-in, Jasmine noticed Bradley leaned toward a passing flight attendant, a tall blonde woman whose nameplate read Victoria Whitfield. He murmured something, nodding in their direction. The flight attendant's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly as she glanced at Jasmine and Zoe. What did he say to her? Jasmine wondered, uneasiness creeping up her spine. With boarding passes finally in hand, Jasmine thanked Diana and guided Zoe toward security. The little girl had grown noticeably quieter, her earlier excitement about the trip fading into watchfulness. "Are you okay?" Jasmine asked gently. Zoe nodded but didn't speak. Jasmine recognized the warning signs, the withdrawal, the tension in her small shoulders. It was how Zoe responded to conflict, a self-protective mechanism developed during the turbulent years before foster care. The security line stretched ahead of them, moving with the particular slowness reserved for holiday travel. As they inched forward, Jasmine debated whether to process what had happened or distract Zoe from it. Before she could decide, a TSA agent approached them. "Excuse me, ma'am. You've been selected for additional screening," he announced, motioning them to a separate lane. "Both of us?" Jasmine asked, keeping her voice neutral despite her growing frustration. "Yes, ma'am. Random selection." As they stepped into the designated area, Jasmine noticed a black woman with two young boys watching sympathetically from the regular line. When their eyes met, the woman gave a small, knowing nod that spoke volumes. This was a shared experience and unwelcome familiarity. The random screening took an additional 22 minutes. Their carry-on bags were thoroughly searched, with Zoe's backpack receiving particular attention. The agents maintained professional language, but their scrutiny felt anything but random. When they finally cleared security, Jasmine checked her watch. Their comfortable time buffer had evaporated. They would need to go directly to the gate. "We'll get something to eat on the plane," she promised Zoe, whose usual pre-flight snack had been sacrificed to the extended screening. As they hurried through the terminal, the woman from the security line fell into step beside them, her sons trotting to keep pace. "First time flying with your little one?" she asked, her voice carrying understanding that went beyond the simple question. "First time together," Jasmine confirmed. "I'm Jasmine, this is Zoe." "Tanya," the woman replied. "These are my boys, Marcus and Devin. Listen, I saw what happened back there. Just wanted to say, stay strong, document everything. They count on us staying quiet." Jasmine nodded gratefully. "We're on SA 238 to Chicago." "Us too," Tanya replied. "Maybe we'll see you on board." She gave Zoe a warm smile before hurrying her boys toward a restroom. The brief solidarity fortified Jasmine's resolve. As they approached Gate C-22, she squared her shoulders, already preparing for whatever might come next. The journey had barely begun, yet she could sense this wouldn't be the last hurdle they'd face today. What she couldn't yet know was how high those hurdles would become, or how their ordeal would eventually echo far beyond this crowded terminal. The crowded gate area buzzed with pre-boarding energy, passengers jockeying for position, children racing between rows of seats, harried parents corralling luggage and snacks. Jasmine found two empty seats near the window, positioning herself between Zoe and the surge of travelers. "How about some water?" she asked, pulling a pink plastic bottle from her bag. The security ordeal had left them both dehydrated and tense. Zoe accepted the water with a small nod, her eyes darting around the unfamiliar space. The sensory overload of the airport, the announcements echoing through the terminal, the beeping of service vehicles outside, the constant movement of strangers, was precisely the type of environment that could trigger her anxiety. Jasmine reached into her carry-on and extracted a pair of purple noise-canceling headphones. "Would these help?" she offered, remembering the social worker's advice about managing overwhelming situations. Relief washed over Zoe's face as she slipped them on, the chaotic soundscape immediately muted. Jasmine gently squeezed her hand. Another small victory in their journey together. The gate agent's voice crackled over the loudspeaker. "Superior Airways Flight 238 to Chicago O'Hare will begin boarding shortly. We invite our passengers requiring special assistance and families traveling with children under the age of 6 to board at this time." "That's us," Jasmine said, tapping Zoe's shoulder. The little girl removed her headphones and gathered her belongings. Together they approached the priority boarding lane. As Jasmine presented their boarding passes, a flight attendant with perfectly coiffed blonde hair stepped forward, blocking their path. Jasmine instantly recognized her as Victoria Whitfield, the same attendant who had spoken with Bradley at check-in. "Excuse me," Victoria said, her voice carrying across the waiting area. "This boarding group is for families with young children." "Yes, I understand," Jasmine replied calmly. "We qualify for family boarding. My daughter is 8. Victoria's eyes narrowed as they flicked between Jasmine and Zoe. "Your daughter?" The pause was slight but unmistakable. "The policy is for children under 6. Jasmine maintained her composure. "Actually, Superior Airways policy is for families with children 12 and under during holiday travel periods. It's listed on your website and the boarding announcement just specified children, not an age restriction." Several nearby passengers had begun to watch the exchange. Zoe pressed closer to Jasmine's side, tension radiating from her small frame. I'm not seeing that in our system, Victoria replied, her tone cooling further. You'll need to wait for your assigned boarding group. Is there a problem here? A deep voice interrupted from behind them. A tall black man in a business suit stepped forward, his Superior Airways Platinum membership card visible in his hand. I couldn't help overhearing. Not at all, sir, Victoria responded, her demeanor instantly warming. Just ensuring our boarding procedures are followed correctly. Well, I fly this route weekly, the man said. And the family boarding policy definitely includes children up to 12 during peak travel periods. He extended his hand to Jasmine. Michael Winters, corporate attorney. Jasmine Carter, she replied, gratitude washing over her. And this is Zoe. Michael turned toward Victoria, his professional smile never wavering. Perhaps you could double-check that policy. I'd hate for us to delay boarding over a misunderstanding. Victoria's expression tightened, but she stepped aside. I'll verify the policy with my supervisor. Meanwhile, you may proceed, Ms. Carter. As Jasmine guided Zoe toward the jet bridge, she whispered a thank you to Michael, who nodded and stepped back into the regular boarding line. Who was that man? Zoe asked quietly, as they walked down the narrow corridor. Someone kind, Jasmine answered simply. There are always good people around when you need them. The relief of clearing the boarding hurdle evaporated as they stepped onto the aircraft. Jasmine felt the weight of dozens of eyes tracking their progress down the aisle. Victoria had taken position at the front of the cabin, scrutinizing boarding passes with exaggerated attention. When Jasmine and Zoe approached, her verification took noticeably longer than it had for previous passengers. Seats 14D and 14E, Victoria finally said, her professional smile never reaching her eyes. Jasmine nodded and continued down the aisle, acutely aware of the whispers following them. A middle-aged white couple in row 10 openly stared, the woman leaning to whisper something to her husband. 2 rows later, a businessman frowned and checked his seat assignment card twice, as if hoping he wouldn't be seated near them. Is something wrong with us? Zoe whispered, her voice barely audible. The question pierced Jasmine's heart. Absolutely nothing, she replied firmly. Sometimes people are just curious or tired from traveling. It has nothing to do with you. But Jasmine knew better. The scrutiny, the whispers, the subtle and not so subtle questioning of their relationship. It was all painfully familiar as a black foster parent to a biracial child. She'd encountered it at parks, grocery stores, and doctor's offices. The assumption that they couldn't possibly belong together. When they reached row 14, an elderly white woman with silver hair was already seated by the window. She looked up with a warm smile that instantly distinguished her from most of the faces they'd encountered so far. Hello there, she greeted them, her southern accent gentle. Looks like we're neighbors for this flight. I'm Ruth Miller. Jasmine Carter, and this is Zoe, Jasmine replied, helping Zoe into the middle seat before taking the aisle position herself. First flight? Ruth asked Zoe kindly. Zoe shook her head. Third, but first with my foster mom. The words came out in a rush, as if she felt compelled to explain their relationship before questions arose. Well, isn't that lovely, Ruth said without missing a beat. My sister was a foster parent for 30 years. Such important work. She rummaged in her purse and extracted a small packet of colored pencils and a travel-sized sketchbook. I always carry these for my grandkids. Would you like to use them during the flight? Zoe's eyes widened as she looked to Jasmine for permission. That's very kind of you, Jasmine said, nodding her approval to Zoe. As the little girl accepted the gift, Jasmine felt some of the tension in her shoulders dissipate. Perhaps this flight wouldn't be as challenging as the boarding process had suggested. Have you ever stepped in to help someone facing discrimination? Comment number 1 if you believe more people should speak up like Michael did in this story. Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly because of assumptions about what a real family looks like. And subscribe to hear more stories about everyday heroes standing up against injustice. What do you think will happen next? Will Victoria back down after being challenged? Or is this just the beginning of Jasmine and Zoe's ordeal? Let's continue. their story and find out how a routine flight became the catalyst for nationwide change. The boarding process continued around them, the narrow aisle filling with passengers struggling with overhead compartments and stepping on toes. Jasmine kept her attention divided between Zoe, who had begun carefully coloring in Ruth's sketchbook, and the ongoing activity at the front of the aircraft, where Victoria continued her exaggerated inspection of boarding passes. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a slight delay with our final preparations," the captain's voice announced over the intercom. "We should be ready for pushback in approximately 15 minutes. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for departure." Jasmine watched as Victoria and two other flight attendants began moving through the cabin. A male attendant with a nameplate reading Derek Ramirez approached their row with a genuine smile. "Seatbelts fastened?" he asked, checking each of their restraints with professional efficiency. When he reached Zoe, he gave an approving nod to her artwork. "That's quite the masterpiece. First time flying?" "First time with my foster mom," Zoe replied, the explanation again coming quickly, automatically. Derek didn't react to the clarification beyond a warm smile. "Well, if you need anything during the flight, just press this button here." He demonstrated the call button above their seats. "Thank you," Jasmine said, appreciating his straightforward kindness. As Derek moved on, Jasmine noticed Victoria watching their interaction from several rows ahead, her expression unreadable. When their eyes met, Victoria quickly turned away, leaning to whisper something to another flight attendant. The plane filled to capacity, holiday travelers packed tightly into every available seat. The air grew warmer, stuffier, adding to the undercurrent of tension Jasmine could feel building. When the safety demonstration began, Victoria positioned herself directly across from their row, her gaze repeatedly drifting toward them during her rehearsed movements. "Is she mad at us?" Zoe whispered, noticing the flight attendant's attention. "No, sweetheart. She's just doing her job," Jasmine replied, though she didn't believe her own words. Something about Victoria's demeanor suggested this was personal, that the confrontation at boarding had only been the opening act. The aircraft finally pushed back from the gate, the engines rumbling to life beneath them. Zoe clutched her elephant, tighter, her small body tensing at the unfamiliar sensations. Jasmine placed a reassuring hand over hers. "Remember how we talked about takeoff? It's like a really fast car ride, and then we'll be up in the clouds," she explained softly. Ruth leaned over with a conspiratorial whisper. "I still get nervous during takeoff myself, and I've been flying for 60 years. It helps to suck on. A candy." She offered a peppermint from her purse. Zoe accepted it with a tentative smile, the simple kindness momentarily distracting her from her anxiety. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Jasmine noticed a man across the aisle speaking to Victoria, who had taken her jump seat position for takeoff. The man gestured subtly in their direction, and Victoria nodded, her expression solemn. Moments later, a flight attendant approached the man with a tablet. After a brief exchange, the man gathered his belongings and moved to a seat several rows ahead. The realization hit Jasmine like a physical blow. The passenger had requested to be moved away from them. It wasn't the first time she'd experienced such a reaction, but it stung nonetheless, especially knowing Zoe might have noticed. The aircraft paused at the runway threshold, engines idling. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom again. "Folks, we're number 4 for takeoff. We're showing some weather moving into the Chicago area, so we're working on getting updated arrival information. Should be just another few minutes." The collective groan from passengers reflected the frustration of further delay. Babies began crying in the back of the aircraft, and the temperature in the cabin seemed to rise another few degrees. Zoe shifted uncomfortably in her seat, the combination of anxiety, heat, and confinement beginning to overwhelm her. "Water?" Jasmine asked, noticing Zoe's flushed cheeks. She pressed the call button, hoping to request a drink before takeoff. Victoria appeared at the end of their row, her professional mask firmly in place. "We're preparing for takeoff. The button is for emergencies only at this time." "My daughter needs some water," Jasmine explained. "She's feeling anxious." Victoria's gaze flicked between them, that slight pause before "daughter" appearing again in her expression. "We can't serve beverages until we reach cruising altitude. Company policy." She reached up and switched off the call button before walking away. "I have a small water bottle in my bag," Ruth offered quietly. "They can't object to that." Jasmine thanked her, helping Zoe take small sips from Ruth's bottle. As the liquid touched her lips, Zoe's breathing began to quicken. Short, shallow breaths that Jasmine instantly recognized as the beginning of a panic attack. "Zoe, look at me," she said firmly, turning in her seat to create a bubble of privacy around them. "Remember our breathing exercise. In through your nose, count to 4. Hold for 4. Out through your mouth, count to 4. Zoe tried to follow along, but her breaths came faster, her pupils dilating with fear. This wasn't just normal flight anxiety. It was a trauma response, triggered by the accumulating stress of the day's events and the confined space of the aircraft. "She's hyperventilating," Ruth observed with concern. Jasmine nodded, continuing to coach Zoe through the breathing techniques their therapist had taught them. "You're safe. I'm right here. No one can hurt you." From the corner of her eye, Jasmine saw Derek notice their situation. He approached quickly, crouching in the aisle beside them. "Everything okay here?" he asked quietly. "She's having a panic attack," Jasmine explained. "She has a history of trauma. It helps if she can have something cold to hold and some space to breathe." Without hesitation, Derek produced an ice pack from a first aid kit and discreetly passed it to Jasmine. "Press it against the back of her neck," he suggested. "I'll see if we can get you both moved to the emergency exit row where there's more space, once we're at cruising altitude." His kindness was a stark contrast to Victoria's rigid enforcement of policy. Jasmine thanked him, applying the ice pack as suggested. The cold sensation created a new focal point for Zoe, helping to interrupt the panic cycle. "What's going on here?" Victoria's voice cut through their moment of progress. She stood at the end of their row, arms crossed, expression stern. "The child is having a panic attack," Derek explained professionally. "I've provided an ice pack to help manage the symptoms." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "We're about to take off. Everyone needs to be properly seated with seatbelts fastened. If the minor is experiencing a medical emergency, we may need to return to the gate." "It's not a medical emergency," Jasmine stated firmly. "She's working through anxiety, which is under control." "It doesn't appear under control to me," Victoria replied, her voice carrying to nearby rows. "And you're raising your voice isn't helping the situation." Jasmine hadn't raised her voice, but she recognized the tactic, painting her as aggressive, unreasonable, creating a narrative for the audience of passengers now openly watching the exchange. "Ms. Whitfield," Derek interjected quietly, "I believe the situation is resolving. Perhaps we should continue our pre-takeoff checks." Victoria hesitated, clearly torn between asserting her authority and causing a further scene. Finally, she nodded curtly and moved toward the front of the aircraft, but not before announcing loudly to the cabin, "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the disturbance. We'll be taking off momentarily." The subtle framing of Jasmine and Zoe as the disturbance wasn't lost on the passengers around them. Whispers circulated. Glances thrown their way ranged from sympathetic to suspicious. "Don't you pay her any mind," Ruth whispered, patting Zoe's hand. "Some people just weren't raised right." Zoe's breathing had begun to stabilize, the ice pack, and Jasmine's steady coaching slowly bringing her back from the edge of panic. But Jasmine could feel the cabin atmosphere had shifted. Lines were being drawn. Passengers were taking sides in a conflict that shouldn't have existed. As the plane finally accelerated down the runway, lifting into the gray December sky, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that this flight had transformed into something far more complicated than a simple journey to Chicago. What should have been a celebratory first trip together had become a battleground, and they were still hours from their destination. The seatbelt sign pinged off 30 minutes into the flight, the aircraft having reached its cruising altitude of 36,000 feet. The cabin atmosphere had settled into the familiar rhythm of air travel, the low hum of conversation, occasional bursts of laughter, the rustle of snack packages being opened. Zoe had fallen into an exhausted sleep after her panic attack, her head resting against Jasmine's shoulder. The colored pencils and sketchbook lay forgotten on the tray table. Jasmine hadn't moved, despite her arm growing numb, unwilling to disturb the child's hard-won peace. "She's a strong little thing," Ruth observed quietly from the window seat. "Reminds me of my granddaughter, resilient on the outside, tender within." Jasmine nodded, grateful for the woman's continued kindness. "We're working on building trust. Days like today don't help. Some people are determined to make the world harder than it needs to be," Ruth replied, shaking her head slightly. The beverage service had begun at the front of the aircraft. Derek worked efficiently through the first-class cabin, while Victoria and another female attendant managed the economy section. Jasmine watched their progress, noting how Victoria's customer service smile appeared and disappeared depending on who she was serving. When the beverage cart finally reached their row, it was Victoria who stood beside it, not Derek. "Something to drink?" she asked, her tone professionally detached. "Apple juice for my daughter, please," Jasmine requested. "And coffee for myself, black." Victoria poured the apple juice without comment, but as she handed it to Jasmine, her eyes lingered on the sleeping Zoe. "She seems to have recovered from her episode." The emphasis on the word made it sound like an accusation, as if Zoe's panic attack had been either fabricated or a sign of something more sinister. "Children are resilient," Jasmine replied evenly, accepting the coffee cup Victoria now extended. "Thank you." Victoria didn't move on to the next row. Instead, she leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice. "Ma'am, several passengers have expressed concerns about your interaction with the minor." Jasmine felt her body tense, immediately alert to the threat underlying Victoria's words. "Concerns? About what exactly?" "The discrepancy in your appearance, her distress, your forceful manner. It raises questions about the nature of your relationship." The implication hung in the air between them, so outrageous that for a moment Jasmine couldn't form a response. Passengers in nearby rows had fallen, silent, straining to overhear the exchange. "I'm her foster mother," Jasmine finally stated, keeping her voice calm despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "As I've explained several times today, I have all the necessary documentation which was verified at check-in." Victoria's expression remained impassive. "Nevertheless, I'll need to see that documentation again." "That's not standard protocol," Jasmine countered. "Once identification is verified at the gate, flight attendants don't typically request additional documentation mid-flight. In situations where child welfare is concerned, we have an obligation to be thorough," Victoria insisted, her voice rising slightly, ensuring others could hear. "If you're unwilling to provide documentation, I'll need to report this to the captain." The conversation had attracted the attention of nearly everyone within earshot. Zoe stirred against Jasmine's shoulder, disturbed by the tension in her foster mother's body and the escalating voices. "What's happening?" she murmured sleepily. Before Jasmine could respond, Victoria addressed Zoe directly. "Honey, I just need to make sure you're okay. Do you know this woman?" The question, asked as if Jasmine were a stranger, a potential threat, sent a wave of shocked murmurs through the surrounding rows. Zoe's eyes widened, darting between Victoria and Jasmine in confusion. "She's my foster mom," Zoe answered, her voice small but clear. "And do you feel safe with her?" Victoria pressed. The question hung in the air, its inappropriateness stunning Jasmine into momentary silence. Around them, several passengers had begun recording the interaction on their phones, the modern instinct to document conflict overtaking any concern for privacy. "This is completely unprofessional," Jasmine stated, finding her voice. "You're questioning a child about her placement in front of an audience of strangers. That violates every protocol of child welfare services." "I'm following airline security protocols," Victoria countered. "Given the circumstances." "What circumstances?" Jasmine interrupted, her patience finally breaking. "The circumstance that I'm black and my foster daughter isn't? Is that the discrepancy you're concerned about?" The direct naming of the Racial element sent another ripple through the cabin. Some passengers looked away uncomfortably, others leaned forward, more invested in the unfolding drama. "Race has nothing to do with this," Victoria responded, though her flicker of discomfort suggested otherwise. "This is about the welfare of a minor showing signs of distress while traveling with an adult who has limited documentation." "My documentation is not limited. It's comprehensive and was verified by your own airline staff," Jasmine countered. "What's happening here is profiling, plain and simple." Victoria straightened, her professional demeanor hardening. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. You're creating a disturbance." It was the second time Victoria had accused her of raising her voice when she hadn't, a tactic Jasmine recognized all too well. The angry black woman stereotype being weaponized against her in real time. "I'm not the one creating a disturbance," Jasmine replied, deliberately keeping her tone measured. "You're publicly questioning my relationship with my foster daughter based on our different appearances. That's discrimination." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Security will meet the aircraft in Chicago. They can sort this out on the ground." She turned to Zoe again. "Honey, if you need anything, you can press the call button. I'll come right away." The implication was clear. Victoria was positioning herself as Zoe's protector against Jasmine. It was as insulting as it was absurd. As Victoria finally moved the beverage cart to the next row, Jasmine became aware of Zoe trembling beside her. The little girl's eyes had filled with tears, her small hands clutching her stuffed elephant with white-knuckled intensity. "Are they going to take me away from you?" she whispered, the question breaking Jasmine's heart. "Absolutely not," Jasmine assured her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "This is a misunderstanding that's going to be cleared up. You and I are family, and no one can change that." From across the aisle, the businessman who had been watching the exchange spoke up. "That was completely inappropriate," he said loudly enough for surrounding rows to hear. "I'm filing a complaint about this when we land." Several other passengers murmured agreement. The public confrontation had backfired on Victoria, creating sympathy for Jasmine and Zoe rather than suspicion. But the damage to Zoe's sense of security had already been done. Her wide, frightened eyes darted around the cabin as if expecting authorities to appear at any moment. "Flight attendants, please report to the galley," the captain's voice suddenly announced over the intercom. Derek, who had been working the first-class cabin, caught Jasmine's eye as he passed their row. His expression conveyed both apology and concern before he disappeared behind the curtain where Victoria had already retreated. "I've been flying Superior Airways for 30 years, Ruth said firmly from the window seat. "Never seen anything like this. Don't you worry, I'll be speaking to the captain myself when we land. I've got the CEO's email from when they lost my luggage last spring." Jasmine thanked her, but her mind was already racing ahead. This situation had escalated beyond what could be resolved with customer service complaints or apologies. Victoria had publicly questioned her legitimacy as a parent, suggested she might be trafficking Zoe, and promised security intervention upon landing. The implications were serious and potentially dangerous. She needed to act now, before they landed in Chicago. She needed allies more powerful than sympathetic passengers. Most importantly, she needed to protect Zoe from further trauma. "I need to use the restroom," Jasmine said quietly to Ruth. "Would you mind?" "I'll keep an eye on her," Ruth assured her, understanding immediately. "Take your time." Jasmine squeezed Zoe's hand. "I'll be right back, sweetheart. Ms. Ruth is going to sit with you for just a few minutes." As Jasmine made her way toward the rear lavatory, she felt the weight of eyes following her movement through the cabin. Victoria watched from the galley, her expression unreadable. Derek gave a small nod of acknowledgement as she passed. What would happen in Chicago if she didn't intervene? Would security really meet the plane? Would Zoe be separated from her for questioning? The thought was unbearable. Inside the tiny lavatory, Jasmine locked the door and leaned against the sink, finally allowing herself a moment of unguarded emotion. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her phone in airplane mode. She couldn't make calls, but she could activate the one tool that might change the trajectory of this nightmare. She switched to her phone's recording app and pressed record. "My name is Jasmine Carter," she began quietly. "I'm on Superior Airways Flight 238 from Atlanta to Chicago on December 18th. I need to document what's happening before this situation escalates further." She spoke for 3 minutes, detailing the events from check-in through Victoria's public interrogation. When she finished recording, she took a deep breath and made a decision. There was one more thing she needed to do, one call that could change everything. And to make that call, she would need to break the rules. The fluorescent light in the lavatory buzzed overhead as Jasmine stared at her phone. What she was considering, turning off airplane mode to make a call mid-flight, violated federal aviation regulations. The potential consequences ranged from a stern warning to arrest upon landing, but the consequences of doing nothing seemed far worse. "This is about Zoe," she whispered to herself. "Everything else is secondary." With resolute fingers, she disabled airplane mode. The phone immediately searched for a signal, unlikely at 36,000 feet. But modern aircraft Wi-Fi systems sometimes created enough connectivity for text messages to squeeze through. It was a slim chance, but one she had to take. Instead of a call, Jasmine opened her messaging app and typed rapidly, "Ayana, emergency on SA Flight 238 ATL ORD. Flight attendant publicly accused me of trafficking Zoe, threatened security at landing, racial profiling, need help now, wheels down Chicago 2:45 p.m. She pressed send and watched the progress circle spin, praying the message would find its way through the digital ether. After 30 agonizing seconds, the confirmation appeared. Delivered. Ayana Washington wasn't just Jasmine's former foster sister. She was a civil rights attorney with the National Legal Defense Coalition, specializing in cases of racial discrimination. More importantly, she had connections throughout the transportation industry and government agencies from her years of advocacy work. If anyone could help, it would be Ayana. Jasmine quickly switched airplane mode back on and splashed cold water on her face. She needed to return to Zoe with a calm demeanor. The child was perceptive enough to sense fear, and Jasmine refused to add to her anxiety. As she exited the lavatory, she nearly collided with Victoria, who stood directly outside the door. "That was quite a long bathroom visit," Victoria remarked, her tone implying something suspicious had occurred. "I wasn't feeling well," Jasmine replied evenly. "The stress, perhaps." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Cell phone use is prohibited during flight." The accusation hung between them. Had Victoria somehow known? Or was she fishing, hoping Jasmine would incriminate herself? "I'm aware of the regulations," Jasmine stated, neither confirming nor denying. She moved to step around the flight attendant. Victoria blocked her path slightly. "We'll be beginning our initial descent into Chicago shortly. The captain has asked that you and the minor remain seated until all other passengers have deplaned. Upon arrival." "Is that standard procedure?" Jasmine asked, though she knew it wasn't. "It is when there are security concerns," Victoria replied, her professional mask firmly in place. "Now, please return to your seat." As Jasmine made her way back down the aisle, she noticed several passengers watching the interaction. The businessman who had spoken up earlier caught her eye and shook his head slightly, indicating his disapproval of Victoria's behavior. When she reached row 14, Jasmine found Zoe engaged in quiet conversation with Ruth, who had apparently been sharing stories about her grandchildren. The distraction had helped calm the little girl, though her shoulders remained tense. "Everything okay?" Ruth asked as Jasmine settled back into her seat. "We'll see," Jasmine replied, unwilling to make promises she couldn't keep. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into the Chicago area. Weather at O'Hare is currently 34 degrees with light snow. We should be on the ground in approximately 25 minutes. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for arrival. 25 minutes until they would face whatever awaited them in Chicago." Jasmine pulled Zoe close, whispering reassurances she hoped weren't empty. "I need to tell you something important," she said softly. "When we land, there might be some people who want to ask us questions. It might seem scary, But I promise I won't let anything bad happen. We're going to stay together." Zoe's eyes widened. "Because of the lady who doesn't believe you're my foster mom?" "Yes," Jasmine confirmed, never one to shield Zoe from difficult truths. "But I've contacted someone who's going to help us. Her name is Ayana, and she's like family to me. She knows exactly what to do in situations like this." Assuming the message had gone through. Assuming Ayana saw it in time. Assuming she could mobilize resources quickly enough to intercept whatever Victoria had set in motion. Too many assumptions. Too little certainty. The aircraft continued its descent through clouds, the Chicago skyline appearing and disappearing through the window. Ruth reached across Zoe to squeeze Jasmine's hand briefly, a silent gesture of solidarity. Victoria appeared at the front of their section, performing final compliance checks with mechanical efficiency. When she reached their row, her gaze lingered on Zoe. "We'll be landing shortly," she stated unnecessarily. "Security personnel will board the aircraft first in Chicago. Please remain calm and cooperative." The public announcement of security involvement sent another wave of murmurs through the cabin. Passengers exchanged glances, some looking sympathetic, others curious or concerned. "This is harassment," the businessman across the aisle stated loudly. "I'm recording this, just so you know." He held up his phone pointedly. Victoria's professional smile tightened. "Sir, recording crew members without consent is against airline policy." "Funny how selectively you enforce policy," he retorted. Before Victoria could respond, her name was called over the intercom. "Flight Attendant Whitfield, please report to the cockpit immediately." A flicker of surprise crossed Victoria's face before she composed herself and moved toward the front of the aircraft. As she disappeared behind the cockpit door, Jasmine felt a flutter of hope. Had her message reached Ayana? Had some intervention already begun? The aircraft banked sharply to the left, a deviation from the standard approach pattern to O'Hare that Jasmine had flown many times before. Passengers looked up in confusion, conversations pausing as everyone sensed the change in flight path. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice returned, sounding decidedly less routine than before. "We've been instructed to return to Atlanta due to an administrative issue. Our new estimated arrival time is approximately 45 minutes. We apologize for the inconvenience." The cabin erupted in confusion and complaints. A businessman shouted about missed connections. A mother worried aloud about childcare arrangements. Through it all, Jasmine sat perfectly still, processing what this meant. They weren't landing in Chicago. They were returning to Atlanta. Victoria emerged from the cockpit, her face noticeably paler than before. When her gaze met Jasmine's across the cabin, something had changed. The confidence was gone, replaced by uncertainty, perhaps even fear. "What's happening?" Zoe whispered, clutching her elephant tighter. "I think," Jasmine replied slowly, a smile beginning to form, "that Ayana got my message." The aircraft leveled off at a lower altitude, clearly repositioning for its return to Atlanta. Passengers continued to demand explanations, but the flight attendants offered only vague reassurances about circumstances beyond our control. Derek passed their row during the commotion, leaning down slightly as he checked their seatbelts. "Whatever you did," he whispered almost imperceptibly, "worked. There are officials waiting in Atlanta." Jasmine nodded her thanks, her heart rate finally beginning to slow. The tide was turning. Whatever Victoria had set in motion had been intercepted by something bigger, or someone with more authority. As the Atlanta skyline reappeared through breaks in the cloud cover, Jasmine felt Zoe relax against her side for the first time since boarding. The little girl didn't fully understand what was happening, but she sensed the shift in power, the return of safety. "Are we still going to see Grandma?" she asked, practical concerns returning now that the immediate threat seemed to be receding. "Absolutely," Jasmine promised. "This is just a detour, an important one." The aircraft touched down smoothly on Atlanta's runway, taxiing toward a remote area of the airport rather than returning to the terminal. As they rolled to a stop, the seatbelt sign remained illuminated. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain announced, his voice notably more formal than previous communications, We must ask that you remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We will be boarding additional personnel momentarily. Have you ever witnessed someone in a position of authority abuse their power? Comment number 1. If you believe accountability is essential when discrimination occurs. Like this video if you've ever had to stand up for yourself or someone you care about in the face of prejudice. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience. What kind of additional personnel do you think are boarding the plane? Is Jasmine about to face consequences for breaking airline regulations? Or is Victoria finally going to be held accountable for her actions? The turning point in this story is just ahead. The aircraft door opened with a hydraulic hiss. Through the windows, passengers could see not the typical jetway, but a set of portable stairs positioned at the forward entrance. Conversation in the cabin dropped to whispers as everyone strained to see who would board. 2 individuals in dark suits climbed the stairs and entered the aircraft. Their government IDs glinted under the cabin lights as they introduced themselves to the lead flight attendant. Though they weren't in uniform, their authoritative presence immediately commanded the cabin's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," one of the agents announced, her voice carrying clearly through the silent aircraft. "I'm Special Agent Diane Rodriguez with the Department of Transportation's Civil Rights Division. This is my colleague, Agent Marcus Taylor. We need to speak with the captain and senior flight attendant Victoria Whitfield immediately. All other passengers will be deplaning shortly for your convenience while we conduct our investigation." Victoria stood frozen near the galley, her complexion ashen. The transformation from her earlier confidence to current dismay was stark and visible to everyone watching. "Investigation?" someone murmured from the back of the plane. Agent Rodriguez continued, "We apologize for the inconvenience. Ground crews are preparing transportation to take you to the terminal, where customer service representatives will assist with rebooking options. We ask for your patience as we address a serious matter that has been brought to our attention." Victoria disappeared into the cockpit with Agent Taylor, while Rodriguez remained in the cabin, her posture professional but approachable. "Ms. Carter?" she called, scanning the rows of seated passengers. Jasmine raised her hand slightly. "Yes, that's me. We'd like you and your foster daughter to remain on board briefly after the other passengers deplane. We have some questions regarding the complaint that was filed." A complaint? Ayanna had moved quickly indeed. "Of course," Jasmine agreed, feeling Zoe tense beside her. "May I ask if we're being detained or investigated?" "Not at all," Agent Rodriguez clarified firmly. "You're assisting our investigation into potential civil rights violations. Your cooperation is appreciated, but entirely voluntary." The businessman across the aisle spoke up. "I'd like to stay as well. I witnessed the entire interaction and have video documentation." "As did I," Ruth added from the window seat. "I sat right next to them the whole flight." Agent Rodriguez nodded. "We welcome witness statements. If you're willing to remain briefly, that would be helpful." Within 15 minutes, the aircraft had emptied except for Jasmine, Zoe, Ruth, the businessman who introduced himself as Michael Winters, and a handful of other passengers who had volunteered to provide statements. Victoria remained in the cockpit, with Agent Taylor and the flight crew. "What happens now?" Zoe whispered, her small hand gripping Jasmine's tightly. "Now we tell our story," Jasmine replied gently. "These people are here to make sure what happened to us doesn't happen to other families." Agent Rodriguez approached their row, crouching in the aisle to bring herself to Zoe's eye level, a technique Jasmine recognized from skilled child welfare workers. "Hi there," she said warmly. "You must be Zoe. I'm Diane. I understand today's flight has been pretty stressful for you." Zoe nodded, studying the agent with cautious eyes. "Would it be okay if I ask you and your foster mom some questions about what happened? You can have your elephant friend with you the whole time." This acknowledgement of Zoe's comfort object, treating it as important rather than childish, earned Rodriguez a small smile from the little girl. "It's okay," Zoe confirmed quietly. Rodriguez looked up at Jasmine. "Would you prefer to speak privately, or are you comfortable discussing this here?" "Here is fine," Jasmine decided. "I think transparency is important given what's happened." For the next 20 minutes, Rodriguez took detailed statements from Jasmine and the witnesses. Michael Winters transferred his video recordings to the agent's tablet. Ruth provided her observations about Victoria's behavior throughout the flight. 2 other passengers came forward with accounts of hearing Victoria question Bradley at check-in about Jasmine and Zoe's relationship. Through it all, Zoe remained tucked against Jasmine's side, occasionally adding her perspective in small, clear sentences that carried surprising weight. "She made me feel like I didn't belong with my foster mom," she said at one point, a simple statement that captured the essence of the discrimination they had faced. The cockpit door finally opened. Agent Taylor emerged, followed by the captain, a middle-aged white man who looked deeply troubled, and Victoria, whose professional demeanor had completely collapsed. She wouldn't meet anyone's eyes as she was escorted to a private area in the front of the aircraft for further questioning. "Ms. Carter," the captain said, approaching their row, "I want to personally apologize for what occurred on my aircraft today. I was only made aware of the situation when we received the directive to return to Atlanta. Had I known earlier how my crew member was treating you and your daughter, I would have intervened immediately." His apology seemed genuine, but it raised questions about awareness and accountability within the cockpit. Why hadn't Derek or other crew members alerted him sooner? How much autonomy did flight attendants have to create their own narratives about passengers? Before Jasmine could respond, the aircraft door opened again. A familiar figure appeared at the entrance, Ayanna Washington, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, her braided hair pulled back in a professional bun. Beside her stood 2 airline executives, identifiable by their Superior Airways pins and harried expressions. "Jasmine," Ayanna called, striding down the aisle to embrace her former foster sister. "I came as soon as I got your message. Are you and Zoe all right?" "We're okay," Jasmine assured her, the relief of seeing a trusted face overwhelming. "How did you manage all this so quickly?" Ayanna's smile was part satisfaction, part grim determination. "Let's just say I've been building a case file on discriminatory incidents involving Superior Airways for months. Your situation wasn't isolated. It was part of a pattern. When I got your text, I contacted the DOT's Civil Rights Division directly. They were already investigating the airline." One of the executives stepped forward, extending his hand. "Thomas Reed, Chief Operating Officer for Superior Airways. Ms. Carter, on behalf of our entire company, I want to extend our deepest apologies for the unconscionable treatment you and your daughter experienced today." His corporate apology felt rehearsed compared to the captain's, but Jasmine shook his hand nonetheless. "Apologies are a start," she replied evenly, "but they don't address the systemic issues that allowed this to happen. We're prepared to discuss concrete changes," the second executive interjected. She introduced herself as Sophia Chen, Vice President of Customer Experience, including an immediate review of our training protocols regarding diverse family structures and implicit bias recognition. Ayanna placed a protective hand on Jasmine's shoulder. "Any discussions about policy changes or settlements will need to go through proper channels. My client has been through enough today without being asked to engage in corporate negotiations on an empty aircraft." The word settlement caused a visible reaction from the executives. The stakes had clearly escalated beyond a customer service issue to potential legal liability. "Of course," Reed agreed quickly. "We'll arrange transportation to our executive lounge where you can all be comfortable while we sort out next steps." As the adults discussed logistics, Zoe tugged gently on Jasmine's sleeve. "Are we in trouble?" she whispered. "No, sweetheart," Jasmine assured her. "Actually, I think we might be making things better for other families like ours." Within 30 minutes, they had been escorted to Superior Airways' exclusive lounge, typically reserved for their highest-tier customers. While Zoe enjoyed a hot chocolate and cookies under Ruth's watchful eye, Jasmine, Ayanna, and the DOT agents met with an expanding circle of airline representatives in a private conference room. Victoria had been removed from duty pending a full investigation. The airline was scrambling to contain what was quickly becoming a PR crisis as passengers from the flight shared their experiences on social media. Videos of Victoria's confrontation with Jasmine were already circulating online, accompanied by hashtags like "Flying While Black" and "Why Foster Families Matter." "The most important thing right now," Jasmine insisted during the discussions, is ensuring Zoe and I can continue our trip to Chicago with dignity and support. My mother is expecting us, and Zoe has been looking forward to this visit for weeks. We'll have you on our next flight in first class, Reed promised. With our most experienced and professional crew. Ayanna raised an eyebrow. And what assurances do we have that other crew members don't share Victoria's biases? It was a question that cut to the heart of the matter, one that the executives struggled to answer convincingly. Individual apologies and free upgrades couldn't address institutional problems. Real change would require deeper commitment. As the discussions continued, Jasmine excused herself to check on Zoe. She found the little girl sitting with Michael and Ruth, looking remarkably relaxed given the day's events. We've been talking about Chicago, Ruth explained. I was telling Zoe about the ice skating rink at Millennium Park. And I showed her pictures of the bean sculpture on my phone, Michael added. Turns out we're both architecture fans. Zoe looked up with the first genuine smile Jasmine had seen all day. Michael says buildings tell stories if you know how to listen, like people. The simple observation carried profound truth. Structures, whether buildings or institutions, reflected the values and biases of those who created them. The question was whether Superior Airways was willing to examine its foundation and rebuild where necessary. As evening fell over Atlanta, the airport lights created a gentle glow through the lounge windows. Their ordeal had stretched across an entire day, yet somehow, Jasmine felt stronger than when they'd first arrived at the airport that morning. They had faced discrimination and emerged not just intact, but empowered. Looking at Zoe chatting comfortably with their newfound allies, Jasmine realized something important had shifted. Today's painful experience had shown Zoe that injustice could be confronted, that speaking up mattered, and most importantly, that Jasmine would fight fiercely to protect their family bond. That knowledge might be worth more than any settlement or policy change that would eventually emerge from this chaotic day. As if sensing her thoughts, Zoe looked up and met Jasmine's gaze across the room. The trust reflected there was unmistakable, a bridge between them that Victoria's discrimination had failed to damage and perhaps had even strengthened. They would make it to Chicago tomorrow. They would visit Grandma Evelyn. Life would continue, its forward momentum. But something fundamental had been transformed by their experience 36,000 feet above the earth. Something about courage, advocacy, and the unbreakable bonds of chosen family. Dawn broke over Atlanta as passengers from dozens of early flights filled the terminal, most unaware of the previous day's events that had sent ripples through Superior Airways' corporate structure. But in a private conference room on the executive floor, the repercussions continued to unfold. Jasmine sat beside Ayanna at a polished mahogany table, facing a row of increasingly senior airline officials. Overnight, what had begun as a customer service incident had escalated into a potential, landmark discrimination case that had captured national attention. The videos have reached 4 million views across platforms, reported Melissa Dawkins, Superior Airways Chief Communications Officer, her expression grim as she swiped through analytics on her tablet. Major news networks are requesting statements. The hashtag, #grounded for justice is trending nationally. Thomas Reed, the COO who had offered initial apologies the previous day, looked haggard after a sleepless night of crisis management. Ms. Carter, we want to resolve this situation fairly and expeditiously. We're prepared to offer substantial compensation and a formal public apology. Ayanna leaned forward, her expression coolly professional. My client isn't interested in being silenced with a check and a press release. What happened yesterday reflects systemic issues within your airline, issues that affect countless families who don't have the resources or connections to fight back. Jasmine nodded in agreement. After ensuring Zoe was comfortably settled in the lounge's childcare facility under Ruth's watchful eye, she had spent hours discussing strategy with Ayanna. This wasn't just about their experience anymore. It had become something larger. We've compiled 26 similar incidents reported by passengers over the past 18 months, Ayanna continued, sliding a folder across the table. Disproportionately involving travelers of color, particularly those in family units that didn't match certain employees' expectations of what constitutes a real family. This suggests a pattern, not an isolated incident. The executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. A silver-haired man at the end of the table, who had been introduced as Gerald Winters, chairman of the board, cleared his throat. "We acknowledge there may be room for improvement in our training protocols," he began cautiously, "but to suggest a systemic pattern of discrimination—" "With respect, sir," Jasmine interrupted, her marketing executive voice steady and clear. "When a flight attendant can publicly question a child's safety based solely on the fact that her skin color doesn't match her guardian's, then confidently announce security will meet them upon landing, that indicates more than a training gap. It suggests a culture where such behavior is considered acceptable, even encouraged." The room fell silent. For all their corporate power, none of the executives could deny the evidence captured on video and witnessed by a plane full of passengers. A gentle knock at the door interrupted the standoff. Sophia Chen, the VP of Customer Experience, stepped in and whispered urgently to Reed. His expression shifted from frustrated to resigned. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reed announced to the room, "I've just been informed that Superior Airways CEO, Robert Blackwell, is en route from New York. He's requested that all further discussions wait until his arrival in approximately 1 hour." The CEO's personal intervention signaled the gravity with which the corporation now viewed the situation. As the meeting temporarily adjourned, Jasmine stepped into the hallway to call her mother in Chicago, explaining the delay and assuring her that despite everything, they were still coming. "I saw it on the morning news," Evelyn Carter told her daughter, her voice carrying decades of understanding about navigating a world that questioned Black parenthood. "You did right by that child, standing your ground. How's she holding up?" "Better than expected," Jasmine replied, glancing toward the lounge where Zoe was visible through glass panels, currently engaged in a card game with Michael Winters, who had postponed his business meetings to provide his continued support. "She's resilient, and she's seen me advocate for her, which matters." "Brings back memories," Evelyn said softly. "Remember that teacher in 4th grade who wouldn't believe I was your mother because you were too articulate for a child from that neighborhood?" Jasmine remembered all too well. Her mother had marched into the principal's office the very next morning, demanding both an apology and a policy review. It was one of many moments that had shaped Jasmine's understanding of advocacy, preparing her perhaps for this very moment. "I learned from the best," Jasmine told her mother. "We'll call again before our flight." As she ended the call, Jasmine noticed a flurry of activity near the terminal entrance. A news crew was setting up equipment while airport security created a perimeter. The story had officially broken beyond social media into mainstream coverage. Derek Ramirez, the flight attendant who had shown them kindness during the flight, approached Jasmine hesitantly from the lounge area. "Ms. Carter, I gave my statement to the DOT agents this morning," he said. "I wanted you to know I also filed an internal ethics complaint about Victoria's behavior weeks ago, after witnessing similar incidents. It was never addressed." His admission added another piece to the puzzle. Not just discrimination, but institutional failure to act on reported concerns. "Thank you for doing the right thing yesterday," Jasmine told him. "Your kindness meant a lot to Zoe." Derek nodded. "I became a flight attendant to help people, not intimidate them. What happened on that flight? It wasn't an aberration. There's an unspoken culture among some crew members about who gets extra scrutiny." His inside perspective confirmed what the data had suggested. This wasn't about one biased employee, but about systemic issues that allowed such behavior to flourish unchecked. By the time Robert Blackwell, Superior Airways CEO, arrived, the airport was buzzing with activity. Silver-haired and impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, Blackwell moved with the confidence of someone unaccustomed to apologizing. Yet, as he entered the conference room where everyone had reconvened, his expression suggested he understood the severity of the situation. "Ms. Carter," he began without preamble, "I've reviewed the footage and witness statements from yesterday's incident. It was unacceptable, full stop." He turned to include Ayanna in his gaze. "I understand you've presented evidence suggesting this isn't isolated. I want to see that data. For the next hour, Blackwell listened more than he spoke. A rarity for corporate executives in crisis management mode. He reviewed the folder of incidents, asked pointed questions about Victoria's history with the airline, and consulted quietly with his legal team. Finally, he addressed the room. Here's what happens next. Victoria Whitfield's employment with Superior Airways is terminated, effective immediately. We're launching a comprehensive third-party audit of our training protocols and reporting systems, with results to be made public within 90 days. And we're establishing a passenger advocacy office to handle discrimination complaints, with real authority to implement changes. His directness was unexpected, but welcome. Yet Jasmine and Ayanna exchanged glances, silently agreeing it wasn't enough. Those are positive steps, Ayanna acknowledged, but they don't address the immediate harm caused to my client and her daughter, nor the potential impact on other families who might face similar discrimination before your audit is complete. Blackwell nodded slowly. I'm prepared to offer a settlement that reflects the seriousness of the situation. But more importantly, I'd like Ms. Carter's input on developing new guidelines specifically addressing the treatment of non-traditional families in our system. It was a substantive offer, not just financial compensation but a seat at the table for creating meaningful change. Jasmine considered it carefully. I'll need to consult with my attorney about any settlement, she said, gesturing to Ayanna. But I'm willing to contribute to policy development, with one condition. These changes need to be implemented across your entire operation, not just as recommendations, but as mandatory protocols with real consequences for non-compliance. Blackwell extended his hand. You have my word, and a personal invitation to address our next all-staff training summit. As they finalized the framework of their agreement, activity outside the conference room intensified. The story had gone national, with Superior Airways' stock price already responding to the viral videos and speculation about potential lawsuits. When Jasmine finally returned to the lounge to check on Zoe, she found the little girl surrounded by an unlikely support network. Ruth sharing family photos, Michael sketching Chicago landmarks to visit, and even several other passengers from yesterday's flight who had returned to offer their statements and support. Are we famous now? Zoe asked as Jasmine joined them, having noticed the news crews outside. Not famous, Jasmine corrected gently. But we did something important by speaking up. Sometimes that gets attention. Ruth patted Zoe's hand. Your foster mom is being modest. What happened yesterday is going to help a lot of families who might have been treated the same way, but didn't have anyone to stand up for them. Zoe considered this thoughtfully. Like when you help one person but really you're helping everyone? Exactly like that, Jasmine confirmed, impressed by the child's perception. By mid-afternoon, Superior Airways had issued a formal public apology, announced Victoria's termination, and outlined initial steps toward policy revision. They had also arranged a private executive jet to transport Jasmine and Zoe to Chicago, a gesture that seemed designed as much for publicity as convenience, but was appreciated nonetheless. As they prepared to finally continue their journey, Jasmine reflected on how differently this day had unfolded from what she'd envisioned when packing their suitcases just 24 hours earlier. What was meant to be a simple family visit had transformed into a public stand against discrimination that would potentially benefit countless families. Ready for our adventure to continue? She asked Zoe as they gathered their belongings. The little girl nodded, clutching her now famous stuffed elephant. Can Ruth and Michael come visit us in Chicago? I think that could be arranged, Jasmine replied, touched by how these strangers had become allies and then friends through shared adversity. As they walked toward the private terminal, Jasmine's phone buzzed with notifications, news alerts, social media mentions, messages of support flooding in from across the country. Their story had struck a chord, highlighting experiences that too many families had endured in silence. One message in particular caught her attention, from a foster parent support group she'd joined months earlier. You spoke for all of us today. Thank you for your courage. It was a reminder that advocacy rarely benefited only the individual, that speaking truth to power created ripples extending far beyond the initial confrontation. Yesterday's humiliation had transformed into today's reckoning, and tomorrow, perhaps, meaningful change. The private jet waited on the tarmac, a tangible symbol of how quickly corporate priorities could shift when accountability entered the equation. But for Jasmine, the most significant outcome wasn't the VIP treatment or pending settlement. It was the knowledge that Zoe had witnessed her foster mother fight for their family's dignity and win. That lesson in advocacy would outlast any policy, change, or corporate apology. It would become part of the foundation they were building together, one day at a time. 3 months had passed since that fateful flight. Winter had yielded to spring, bringing cherry blossoms to the National Mall where Jasmine now stood, adjusting her blazer before entering the Rayburn House office building. Zoe waited beside her, dressed in a purple dress she had selected specially for this important day. "Remember what we practiced?" Jasmine asked gently. Zoe nodded, her blonde hair bobbing in the morning sunlight. "I only have to answer questions if I want to, and you'll be right there the whole time." "That's right," Jasmine confirmed, taking the child's hand as they climbed the marble steps. "Your voice matters today, but only share what feels comfortable." Inside, the hallways bustled with congressional staffers and lobbyists navigating the maze of American governance. A legislative aide met them at security, escorting them to a hearing room where the House Transportation Committee had convened a special session on discrimination in air travel. The room already hummed with activity. Journalists setting up cameras, committee members reviewing documents, witnesses organizing their testimony. Jasmine spotted Ayanna near the front, conferring with congressional staff about the order of presentations. "Jasmine!" a familiar voice called from across the room. Ruth Miller waved enthusiastically, her silver hair styled elegantly for the occasion. Beside her stood Michael Winters, who had become a regular presence in their lives since the incident, his business expertise proving invaluable as they navigated the aftermath. "You made it," Jasmine said, embracing them both. "I wasn't sure you'd be able to take time away from work. Wouldn't miss it for the world," Michael replied. "This is history in the making." Ruth bent to Zoe's level. "And how are you doing, sweetheart? Ready for your big day?" "I'm a little nervous," Zoe admitted, clinging to her ever-present stuffed elephant, now sporting a tiny purple bow tie for the occasion. "That's completely normal," Ruth assured her. "Just remember all those families you're helping today." As they took their seats near the witness table, Jasmine surveyed the room. Superior Airways executives occupied a row near the front, including CEO Robert Blackwell and the newly appointed Director of Passenger Advocacy, a position created directly in response to their case. Derek Ramirez sat several rows behind them, recently promoted to lead the airline's reformed customer experience team. Most significantly, on the committee, dais sat members of Congress from across the political spectrum, united by the compelling nature of a story that had transcended partisan divides. Discrimination in transportation struck at fundamental American values of dignity and equal access, values that resonated regardless of political affiliation. The chairwoman called the session to order, introducing the day's agenda. Examining discriminatory practices in air transportation, impact on families of color and policy solutions. When Jasmine's name was called, she approached the microphone with practiced composure, Zoe beside her. The marketing executive who had once prepared presentations for major clients now addressed lawmakers with the same professional confidence, but the stakes felt immeasurably higher. "Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and distinguished committee members, for the opportunity to speak today," she began, her voice steady. 3 months ago, my foster daughter Zoe and I experienced discrimination that no family should ever face. As Jasmine recounted their ordeal, the unnecessary scrutiny at check-in, Victoria's public humiliation, the threat of security intervention, she noticed committee members leaning forward, genuinely engaged. The human element of their story cut through the political theater that often dominated such hearings. "What happened to us that day wasn't unique," Jasmine continued. "It reflected systemic issues that affect countless families whose appearance doesn't match narrow expectations of what constitutes a real family. Foster families, adoptive families, multiracial families, all face additional scrutiny when navigating systems designed with only traditional family structures in mind. The committee's questions were thoughtful and substantive. How had Superior Airways responded? What changes had been implemented? What legislative solutions might prevent similar incidents? When asked about the settlement she had reached with the airline, Jasmine was candid. The financial compensation, while significant, was never my primary concern. More important was Superior Airways' commitment to institutional change, mandatory diversity training, revised documentation protocols for non-traditional families, and the establishment of their passenger advocacy office. She explained how she had channeled the settlement funds into creating the Family Diversity Foundation, a nonprofit supporting foster families of color with resources, advocacy training, and emergency travel assistance. The most meaningful outcome, she concluded, has been watching Zoe develop confidence in our family bond, knowing that I will always advocate fiercely for our relationship, regardless of who questions it. At the chairwoman's invitation, Zoe stepped forward to share her perspective, her small voice carrying surprising authority in the formal setting.
"When that flight attendant made me feel like I didn't belong with my foster mom," she said simply, "it was scary. Kids should feel safe with their families, even if their families look different from what some people expect." Her straightforward
testimony earned supportive nods from committee members and brought a palpable emotional dimension to the policy discussion. This wasn't just about regulations and training protocols. It was about a child's sense of security and belonging. Following their testimony, Robert Blackwell took the witness seat to detail Superior Airways' response. Victoria had indeed been terminated, and the airline had implemented comprehensive reforms that were already being adopted as industry best practices. "We failed, Ms. Carter and Zoe," Blackwell acknowledged publicly. "But their courage in speaking out has created an opportunity for our entire industry to better serve diverse families. The passenger advocacy program led by Mr. Ramirez has already resolved 37 potential incidents before they escalated to the level experienced by the Carters." The hearing continued throughout the morning, with testimony from civil rights experts, transportation officials, and other affected families. By the session's conclusion, there was bipartisan support for legislation strengthening protections against discrimination in air travel, with specific provisions addressing documentation, requirements for foster and adoptive families. Outside the hearing room, reporters gathered for statements. Jasmine kept these brief, emphasizing that their experience had been transformed into positive change through the collective efforts of many allies: Ayana's legal expertise, Derek's ethical stand, Ruth and Michael's unwavering support, and the thousands of families who had shared similar stories after their incident went viral. "This was never just about one flight attendant or one airline," she told the assembled press. "It was about creating systems that recognize and respect all families, regardless of how they're formed or what they look like." As the media dispersed, Ayana approached with news. "The Transportation Equality Act just gained 3 more co-sponsors. After your testimony, it's looking increasingly likely to pass." "That's wonderful," Jasmine replied, though her attention had shifted to Zoe, who looked drained from the morning's intensity. "But right now I think someone needs ice cream before our flight." Their afternoon flight to Chicago, on Superior Airways deliberately chosen, offered a stark contrast to their previous experience. The check-in agent examined their documentation with professional courtesy. The TSA officers processed them through the standard security lane without additional screening. The gate agent welcomed them warmly to the early boarding group. Most notably, the flight attendants treated them with the same respectful attention given to every passenger, the ordinary, unremarkable service that should have been theirs all along. "It feels different," Zoe observed as they settled into their first-class seats, an ongoing courtesy the airline had extended indefinitely. "This is how it always should have been," Jasmine agreed, "and how it should be for everyone, not just us." Ruth and Michael had joined them for this journey, having become honorary family members through their shared experience. As the aircraft reached cruising altitude, Ruth shared photos of her recent family reunion, while Michael entertained Zoe with architectural trivia about Chicago landmarks. "I've been meaning to ask," Michael said during a lull in the conversation. "Have you heard anything about Victoria since the termination?" Jasmine shook her head. "Nothing directly, Ayana mentioned she's filed a wrongful termination lawsuit against the airline, claiming she was following established protocols. But the evidence against her is substantial. The important thing, Ruth added, is that those protocols have changed. Even if individual biases persist, the system now has safeguards and accountability measures. As their flight approached, O'Hare, Jasmine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Not just the physical distance traveled, but the institutional changes their ordeal had sparked. The airline industry had implemented new guidelines for accommodating diverse family structures. Transportation authorities had strengthened anti-discrimination enforcement. Their foundation had already assisted 15 foster families navigating travel challenges. Most importantly, Zoe had thrived in the months since the incident. Her therapist noted significant progress in attachment and trust formation. Her nightmares had decreased, and just last week, Jasmine had received notification that their petition to begin adoption proceedings had been approved. The aircraft touched down smoothly on Chicago's runway. As they taxied toward the terminal, Zoe turned to Jasmine with unexpected seriousness. What if it happens again someday? Someone questioning if we're really family. It was a perceptive question that acknowledged a difficult reality. Policy changes couldn't eliminate every instance of discrimination they might face. Then we'll handle it together, Jasmine answered honestly. We'll stand our ground, seek help when needed, and remember that what matters most is what we know to be true about our family, not what others might assume. Zoe considered this, then nodded. Like we did on the plane. Exactly like that. As they prepared to deplane, Zoe reached for Jasmine's hand, a gesture that had become more frequent in recent months. I'm glad you're my mom, she said quietly, using the term for the first time without the foster qualifier. The simple statement caught Jasmine by surprise, emotion welling in her throat. I'm glad you're my daughter, she replied, the words feeling perfectly right. In the terminal, Evelyn Carter waited with open arms, having followed their congressional testimony online that morning. There's my brave girls, she called, embracing them both. As they walked through the airport, grandmother, mother, and daughter, Jasmine noticed how easily they moved through the space, how unremarkable their family appeared to passing travelers. The invisibility was its own kind of victory, the right to exist without justification or explanation. 1 week later, Jasmine sat before her computer, recording the final segment of an educational video series for foster parents about navigating travel with children of different racial backgrounds. The project, funded through their foundation, would be distributed to foster care agencies nationwide. The most important lesson I learned through our experience, she told the camera, is that advocacy isn't just about fighting wrongs after they occur. It's about creating systems where those wrongs become increasingly unlikely. It's about building a world where children like Zoe don't have to prove they belong with their families, where that belonging is assumed and respected. She paused, considering how to conclude this final message to other parents who might face similar challenges. Your family's legitimacy isn't determined by matching appearances or conventional structures. It's created through love, commitment, and the daily choice to stand by each other when challenges arise. And when systems fail to recognize that legitimacy, remember that your advocacy doesn't just protect your own family, it creates pathways for all families whose journeys don't follow traditional maps. As she ended the recording, Jasmine heard Zoe calling from the living room, eager to show her the latest addition to the scrapbook they'd been creating, a newspaper clipping about the Transportation Equality Act passing its first committee vote. From a single confrontation at 36,000 feet had come transformation, personal, institutional, and perhaps eventually, cultural. The journey continued, both literally and figuratively, with challenges still to navigate and victories yet to celebrate. But they would travel that road together, their family bond strengthened by the very forces that had once sought to question it. Have you ever witnessed a moment when standing up against injustice created ripples of positive change? Has your family ever faced assumptions or prejudice because you didn't fit someone's narrow definition of what a real family looks like? Please share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find it. Subscribe to hear more stories of courage, resilience, and systemic change. And most importantly, share this with anyone who might need to be reminded that families come in all configurations, and each deserves respect and dignity. Thank you for joining Jasmine and Zoe on their journey from discrimination to advocacy. Remember that one phone call, one moment of courage, can sometimes ground an entire system of injustice and open the skies for everyone. This story reminds us that discrimination often thrives in environments where it goes unchallenged. Jasmine's decision to make one crucial phone call transformed an act of racial profiling into a catalyst for systemic change. Her experience teaches us that advocacy isn't just about individual justice. It's about creating ripples that benefit countless others facing similar discrimination. The power dynamic shifted the moment Jasmine refused to accept Victoria's behavior as normal or acceptable. By documenting the incident, seeking allies, and leveraging resources, she transformed from victim to changemaker. Her story demonstrates how institutional racism operates through policies and protocols that disproportionately impact families of color. Perhaps the most important lesson is that children like Zoe learn about justice and injustice through watching the adults in their lives. When Jasmine stood firm against discrimination, she showed Zoe that their family bond was worth fighting for, regardless of what others believed a real family should look like. True change requires both individual courage and institutional accountability. Neither alone is sufficient. The personal became political, transforming one family's traumatic flight into protective policies for diverse families everywhere. Has discrimination ever made you feel like you didn't belong somewhere you had every right to be? Share your story in the comments below. If you've ever witnessed someone standing up against racism or prejudice, let us know how it impacted you. This story shows that one person's courage can create meaningful change when systems fail. If you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of what their family looks like, hit that like button to help spread this message. Subscribe to hear more powerful stories of resilience and justice, and share this video with anyone who might need a reminder that standing up against discrimination isn't just brave, it's necessary for creating a more equitable world. Thank you for joining us on Jasmine and Zoe's journey. Remember, sometimes making one call can ground an entire plane of injustice and clear the skies for everyone who follows.